coming and joining today. That this is a discussion that's been a little while in the making. I think we first started talking to Nat over 12 months ago, probably 15 months ago, about doing this research. Yeah, very excited to be here and actually have the culmination of the research and be joined by people like Taylor, who I'll introduce shortly. I am the chair of the Lendlease LGBTQ network. And I'm also very heavily involved in Interbuild, which is the pride network for the property and construction sector, and one of the leads of the people engagement working group, which looking at LGBTQ inclusion on site is part of our remit. So this is something that we're very focused on within Interbuild. What I'll do today is introduce the panel. Taylor will do an acknowledgement of country, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion for about half an hour up here, and then open up to questions. Some people submitted questions as a part of the registration process, and then we do have a lot of people also joining online. So all up, we've had about 180 people register for this, which is fantastic. So if you see me looking at my phone, that's not because I'm getting bored and playing Angry Birds. It's because I'm just trying to see what questions are coming through that might be suitable for the panel. I don't anticipate we'll get to all the questions today, so we will make sure that any questions that we don't get to, we'll try and put a response up within about a week or so, sort of around the major themes that we do cover. And you should get an email at the end of this session, if you don't let me know, that will have a link to the resources that have been mentioned, as well as an ask to do a very quick 2-minute survey. So having got all that sort of out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to Taylor. Taylor Ling is a submissions coordinator at Besix Watpac, and has spent the last 10 years in the industry in various roles before being in that bid space. They have been an out non-binary person at work since they discovered their identity in early 2018, and have been using their voice to promote the importance of creating a safe, welcoming environment in the workplace. Taylor has also been working with Cricket Australia, the Sydney Sixers, and ACON's Pride in Sport to further understand how to make sport more inclusive for trans and gender diverse people. Outside of work, Taylor has been playing cricket for over 10 years and still competes in the Sydney Women's Grade competition, and has represented New South Wales in the National Indigenous Cricket competition in 2021. So a very accomplished individual. So Taylor, if you can please do the acknowledgement country.
Great, thanks Aaron. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and the lands on which everyone who is out there in space are watching today, but specifically the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to acknowledge all elders past, present and emerging. I'm a proud Planga Marina person myself from Tasmania, and yeah, really want to stress the importance of doing these whenever you can. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Taylor. And I'd also like to extend my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any First Nations people who are joining us here today, either in person or online. So thank you. Also joining us on the panel, we have Dale on the big screen, sort of towering over all of us with the rainbow flag flying. So I'm a bit jealous about that. So Dale joined Lendlease in 1988 with a civil engineering background. Since that time, he's held a number of senior roles across the business in Australia, the UK, China and the USA. They've included in the building, the engineering, the investment management and the military housing businesses. So a broad cross-section of what Lendlease does. He is currently the CEO of Lendlease's Australian business, and from 1 July will become the CEO of all of Lendlease in Australia. So congratulations on that, Dale.
Thank you, Aaron.
He's a member of the Australian Constructors Association, and he's an executive sponsor of the LGBTQ network at Lendlease, and an awesome ally. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Galea. Is it Galea or Galea?
Whichever one.
Yeah, okay, cool. Natalie is an Australian Olympian and spent almost 2 decades working as a construction project manager in Australia and the Middle East before commencing her career in academia. She has previously completed a major industry and government funded research project focused on policy, practice and gender equity in the Australian construction sector, and now studies human rights and gender equity in the construction sector, and is currently researching the effects of a 5-day working week on the well-being of construction workers and their families, and is a prominent voice for change in the industry. Welcome. Next to her is Nikki Elkin. Nikki has over 20 years experience in a number of commercial roles across a wide range of sectors in the UK and Australia. They have an honours degree in mechanical engineering, an MBA, and a Master of Marketing Communication. So very well qualified for just about everything. They're a committed advocate for inclusion and diversity and have founded a Pride network in a previous employer, and is also the co-convener of Pride and Diversity's Sapphire Initiative, which focuses on LGBTQ plus women and those who are perceived as women in the workplace.
Thank you.
Next to me is Dr. Melissa Jardine. Melissa is a former Victorian police officer and in 2002 marched in uniform in Melbourne's Pride March to advocate for better treatment of LGBTQ plus people, both inside the police force and in the community. Since 2008, she has been engaged in research and advocacy for HIV prevention in Southeast Asia, specifically in relation to people who inject drugs, sex workers, and men who have sex with men. In 2020, she co-authored a curriculum for gender responsive harm reduction policing for HIV/AIDS Alliance India, which will be delivered across 6 countries in Asia. Thank you. So now that we've got the introductions out of the way, we'll start with putting people under pressure with some questions. So I'll start with you, Dale. The industry has been looking at how to get more diversity into sites. Why should we care? I mean, why bother?
It's quite blunt, Aaron. I think, but I think it's very important. And first off, I apologise for not being there live. I am coming from the office in Brisbane. I couldn't get down there from our Premier here in Queensland likes to close the borders very, very quickly if I escaped. So apologies for not being live, but I'm glad I could still come through this medium. And certainly I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the Brisbane land that I sit on, the Turrbal Nation. I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the great work, before I answer the question, that Melissa and Natalie have done on this report. Natalie's worked with Lendlease on many fronts in terms of really helping us start to really think about diversity on our sites and how we can actually be more flexible and create a better industry for Lendlease. But to answer your question, I've been, as you said, I started in 1988, so I feel very old in the industry and been around in the industry for over 33 years. And to me, the future of the industry needs to be safe and sustainable. When I say safe, that's both physical, mental, that's making sure there is no bullying and harassment on our sites. A safe site is a highly productive site. It's a quality site. People don't get hurt. People don't get hurt physically or mentally is just vital to make sure a project gets delivered in its rawest form. And a sustainable site and a sustainable industry is one that engages everybody from the community and everybody that we would want to be a part of our sites. At the moment, it is heavily male orientated. It sort of looks and feels still like it did probably 30 years ago when I started. And that's not a sustainable future for the construction industry. If we're trying to get the best and brightest, the most skillful, the most innovative, the most entrepreneurial people to be part of our design and construction industry, unless we're bringing all people to our projects and all of themselves to our project, then the construction industry will fall by the wayside pretty quickly in a 21st century adaptation. So the work of this report helps inform how can we be and present a cultural standard on our sites that is open to everybody to be able to come and participate and thrive. And I think that's vital. Aaron, you talk about why should we care? I can see an industry that could collapse pretty quickly if we don't.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you for that, Dale. And one thing that sometimes comes up is, particularly around this space, people say, look, maybe you're 5% of the population. Often on construction sites, it's more like 2% of the population identify, or at least openly identify, as LGBTQ. When we still don't have gender solved, as Nat often says. So it's sometimes people will say, well, how about we focus on getting gender right first, or First Nations, and then we can worry about LGBTQ. Do you think that the industry needs to solve these things sequentially, or can we actually, or should we actually be doing it all together?
I believe in a holistic approach to diversity and inclusion. It's not working on and first off, it's not trying to categorize people as one part of the community that we need to focus on. Then we focus on another part of the community. You know, this should be about all genders, all race, all sexual orientation, all identification. It's making sure that we look at that all parts of everybody, and have a welcoming and encouraging and open environment that anybody can step into. So be it LGBTQ community, it's not, as you say, it's not categorizing and saying that's this percentage of the community. Everybody should feel welcome. Everybody should feel a part of our construction sites. And it is harder on construction sites than it is in the office. We know that, and therefore we need to be stronger and bolder and have greater leadership to support everybody that's on our sites.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you, Dale. And what would you say, like you've mentioned that there's a fair bit of change happening in the next 5 years, what do you think the major changes are likely to be that will impact on that site culture?
Yeah, it is a good question, and I would want it. You can see change happening. You know, we do look different than we did 30 years ago, than 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I think there's a much more open conversation and a willingness to for everybody to have a voice. You know, it is probably easier on our larger scale projects where we connect with government and industry, and we probably have stronger leadership. It's how do we make sure that we grow, you know, the medium and smaller parts of the business and the more remote and regional parts of construction industry to feel like it would as if you're in Barangaroo and doing, you know, the high-rise residential work next door. So I think there's an element of consistency that needs to really rear its head over the next 5 years. So as much as it feels a little bit more open and culturally acceptable on our sites to be diverse in the heart of Sydney, it needs to feel that in Catherine for the work we do with defence at RAF Base Tyndall. So I think it's about bringing up all parts of the industry. I do think a big part of it too, Aaron, is focusing on our subcontractors and suppliers. Again, it's one thing for a Lendlease to be open about what we expect, but you know the subcontracting nature of our industry is one that's where you really need to put the effort and focus into. So I'd like to think that a number of the items addressed in the report will go towards that.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Dale. Nat, I mean, I'd like to turn to you now that you've been looking at female representation on construction sites for quite some time, and even noted that it's actually been going backwards, which isn't great from a progress perspective. Yeah, Dale's spoken to some of the challenges, but what do you see as the biggest challenges to get the industry to embrace diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, firstly, I just want to, I'll take your question, but I just wanted to thank you, Aaron, particularly for driving this research. He is a very hard driver as a client, but without him steering from the side and ensuring that this is delivered, and you've done an outstanding job and an absolute pleasure to work with. And thank you to you, Dale, again, for backing up and investing in research. You know, we're not consultants, and we pretty much tell life as people on site see it. We are a voice for those people, and sometimes, you know, it's uncomfortable truth. But I think some of the challenges in the sector, look, we've got an incredibly fluid workforce, which is both blue and white collar. And as Dale alluded to, you know, it's made up of different groups of people, both white collar and blue collar. It's largely small and medium-sized companies. So getting that change is really tricky. I think if I look up ahead and I see what some of the barriers are, similarly in this work as well as in gender equality, there has been historically, because of the nature of the sector, a culture of denial and indifference around inclusion. You know, it's a pretty blokey heterosexual environment, and you know, I can't say we've got Brad here from Mates in Construction. It's really not serving our people on site well to be in that following that behaviour. The other thing I think is that we haven't really analysed the way we do things on site. You know, we've sort of focused on fixing individuals and, you know, in a lot of cases, individuals have had to do, who identify as LGBT plus or women, have had to do the heavy lifting in terms of educating others and also pushing back on some of these stereotypes. So I think as a sector, we need to look at how we work. You know, does it suit everybody to work these enormous hours that we're working? You know, are there ways we can change things up a bit and pilot and experiment? And I think the third thing is that when we have tried to push through with change, often it's met with backlash and resistance. You know, and so it is an effort that, you know, needs a lot of attention and drive to keep going. But I must say, like, in the time that I've been working, like, you know, I've come off site myself, and then so it's been 10 years almost in research, which is crazy. But I am seeing these shifts and these conversations, and we are shifting from individual responses to structural, and we're starting to really have some hard conversations, ACA, the Cultural Task Force, around, you know, the sustainability of our workforce, and really putting the human back in at the centre of how we build, I think, is really critical, and working out how different parts of that built environment life cycle we can sort of push and shove, so that, you know, we can say to clients, hey, do you realise what this type program, what impact this is going to have to the people on site, that type of thing. So I think that we're becoming a bit more educated around some of the bigger, the ways we can make bigger shifts and movement within the sector.
Excellent. Thank you, Nat. And with what you've done in gender research, is it very applicable to what the LGBTQ sort of findings are, or are there some important differences between the two?
Look, I think there's some, you know, as I touched on, you know, there's a long history in gender equality of fixing women rather than shifting, making systematic shifts within, you know, the workplace. And like LGBT plus, you know, people, you know, when you read about people's stories of having to navigate the coming out and deal with how to speak to people in their workplace, the emotional labour for both men and women in this work environment is really heavy, and it's exhausting, quite frankly. I think that, you know, those moves to really educating leaders and educating the workforce that we operate in, rather than the women or the LGBT plus community having to do the heavy lifting all the time, that's a positive shift. I think the other thing is too, you know, we have leaders that are really sort of taking it upon themselves. And I would actually say in the last year, I've started to see other companies, and I mean, Lendlease has always had a very strong track record in this area, but I'm seeing it as wanting to be first to market, particularly around policy. And this really challenging the policy of how we've set things up, like parental leave, and, you know, sure, broadening it out to LGBT plus, but maybe dissolving parental leave policy altogether and just making it, you know, leave and seeing what happens. I mean, it's scary for some people, but who knows what change it might bring. And to Dale's point, you know, this is a safety issue. And there are issues around safety, real issues for people from both the LGBT plus community and people identifying as women on sites. And I think it needs to be taken seriously. I mean, I have a hashtag, another day, another dunny. I mean, just getting, you know, making sure that you have a safe place to go to the toilet on a site is really critical. And I think one of the lessons we've learned from our research and this is that companies like Lendlease, you know, to tackle that subcontractor, that huge, massive subcontractors, you're in a great position to educate and share your policy learnings with them. I'm a strong believer in, you know, basic stuff of when you do an induction, stating what behaviours are acceptable on the site, you know, saying we don't tolerate homophobic and sexism on site, and really, you know, but also leaders reinforcing that, not allowing, you know, people who are sexist or homophobic, even if they are superstars or messiahs in their business, to remain. I think it's really hard, but those sorts of making a stand on those things changes behaviour. Just to answer your question, where I do think it's different though, I mean, to a point, is that, you know, this LGBTQ research really identifies how many identities we all have, you know. So whilst, you know, your race, your ability, your culture, your sexuality all comes into play. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you might be able to hide the fact that, you know, or not come out in relation to your sexuality, but you know, you can't hide, say, your gender, for instance. And so I think that, you know, we have to do more work in this area and support people, because that's probably where we need to really focus on looking at some of the policies and changing things up a bit more to address that.
Thanks, Nat. Now, Nikki, a question for you. Yeah, every year Pride and Diversity does a massive survey on LGBTQ inclusion in Australia. What is it telling us about the property and construction sectors?
Yeah, so everyone, you have to forgive me for referring to my notes. I literally finished analysing this data yesterday morning because this is hot off the press later. So yeah, the AWA data. So as you said, we run a survey every year. All of our member organisations can participate, and basically they distribute it as far and wide within their organisations as they're able to. And we ask a whole raft of questions from people's attitudes about LGBTQ people, people's attitudes towards inclusion initiatives, people's mental health and well-being, business measures like productivity and engagement, questions around allyship, and then we do a deep dive into the experiences of people with diverse sexualities and diverse gender identities. And in 2021, we had 45,000 people participate across all sectors, a wide range of industries, all states, all territories, metro area, regional and rural areas, and within all hierarchical levels of an organisation. So it's given us a really good set of data. 2,800 people were from property and construction industry organisations. Now, there were only 12.6% of those who were identified as part of the LGBTQ community, which is underrepresented compared to the national cohort of about 19%. So that's interesting. And I will point out that one of the areas that we were keen to investigate was the experience of site-based employees, because we have anecdotally known forever that you're not going to have as good a time on site as if you're based in the head office. And unfortunately, there were very few survey respondents who, you know, ticked the yes, we are site-based. So either they were, but they didn't identify themselves, or there were low participation levels. So I guess that's on us and back onto the organisations that we're running the survey on behalf of. How do we improve the reach? How do we increase the participation of those people? So unfortunately, we don't have any data to really substantiate this, which is why this piece of research is so important, because we do need to look at these focus questions and really understand the experience of these employees. But what we're hearing about in the industry as a whole, it's actually not looking bad. We've seen that LGBTQ inclusion in the property construction industry is performing well to the national cohort. Now, I do just want to point out some demographic mix differences. There is overrepresentation of men. Now, generally, that correlates with lower levels of LGBTQ inclusion and allyship. But there is overrepresentation of employees with bachelor and postgraduate degrees. There's overrepresentation of people working in city metro areas, and there's overrepresentation of people in senior management positions. And generally, that correlates with higher levels of inclusion and allyship. So we just need to understand what data set we're looking at to understand and contextualize the findings. But we are seeing it's good in this industry. So more employees support the work that they're doing in LGBT inclusion. More employees see initiatives communicated regularly. They hear their senior leaders speak positively. They've got more access to awareness training and allyship training. Health and wellbeing indicators are higher than the national average. So people are feeling mentally well. They're feeling like they can be themselves. They're feeling a sense of belonging. Business case indicators are more positive, so people are feeling productive, they're feeling engaged. And when we start looking at allyship, the number of allies matches the national profile, even though there were fewer LGBTQ people. And this is important because LGBTQ people are twice as likely to be allies for other LGBTQ people. You have fewer of them, but you still have as many allies, and those allies appear to be more visible. So the allyship programs that are going on in this sector are pretty good. They're working well. A key learning that came out of the data is there's that set of people who are passive supporters. In their head, they support the LGBTQ community, but they're not active allies. But within this sector, these people are particularly more likely to be able to be activated if they can be provided resources on how to be an ally when you're busy. That's the biggest reason. I'm not an ally because I'm too busy. If we can provide them specific education and specific resources, you can activate that group of people as well. The experience of LGBTQ employees is also looking pretty good compared to the national cohort. And I do want to particularly call out those employees who are out about their diverse sexuality. They're reporting experiencing lower levels of those negative bullying behaviours, like the jokes, the comments, the slurs, than the national average. So only 7% of people have been targeted with jokes compared to 13% in the national picture, 5% serious bullying or sexual harassment. Now, anyone who remembers me presenting this data back 2 years ago, same analyses, you'll remember I said that those bullying and harassment incidents were significantly higher in this industry than in the general population. Now they're lower. So again, something good has happened in the last 2 years within the participants who went through the survey this year. We are lagging in a couple of areas. So LGBTQ women, to your point, we've not been typically good with all women. LGBTQ women, it's the same. LGBTQ women in general really have an importance in seeing other out LGBTQ women in their organisation. So 80% will say this is really important for my sense of well-being. And across Australia, most women don't have those role models, and it's worse within this industry. The other area where we really need to look at doing some work is for trans and gender diverse employees. We're just not doing that well at all nationally, and in this industry, it's worse. So, for example, only 42% of trans employees found the recruitment process inclusive. Only 31% of respondents have freedom to use the toilets of choice. So really practical things that are barriers, which are real problems. And those negative bullying and harassment behaviours for trans and gender diverse employees are high. And they're higher in this industry than in the national picture. So 18% of people report that they've been deliberately misgendered. 23% of out trans people report that they've been targeted by the jokes, by the unwanted comments. And 15% have been targeted by serious bullying or sexual harassment. So these negative behaviours are experienced at significantly higher levels by trans populations than populations with diverse sexual orientations, and it's worse in this industry. So, I mean, in summary, this industry sector has done some good work. They can be proud of the work that they've done, but there are clearly still a couple of focus areas that we really need to think hard about. How do we bring everyone along?
Thank you for that, Nikki. Taylor, I might just jump over to you now. I mean, Nikki's just spoken about the experience of trans and gender diverse people and how your people's experience is a little bit worse than everybody else. Can you talk about your journey and some of the major milestones and what have been some of the key learnings for you on the way through?
Yeah, so as you heard, my name is Taylor and I use they, them pronouns exclusively, not she, her or he, him. Throughout my kind of transition, I guess you could say, I would like to just preface that, especially as a non-binary person, my experience does not reflect all non-binary people. Not every non-binary person is going to want to transition medically, physically, change their pronouns, etc. So this is just completely from my experience. But I have been an out non-binary person since around early to mid 2018. I didn't know any non-binary people. I didn't even know what non-binary was before I found someone on YouTube that was sharing their story from America around their experience. And I spent around a year in a really bad mental health space thinking, if I'm not a woman, I must be a man. And that didn't feel right to me. So it took me a really long time to really just struggle with the idea that I don't feel comfortable as a woman, so I must be a man. And then I finally found the non-binary identity and clicked with they, them pronouns, and straight away just started using they, them pronouns and telling the world that this is who I am, and I've finally found my place. And when I first came out, I was very against any form of medical transition because I didn't think that that was part of my journey. Then all of a sudden, my body dysphoria hit me hard, and in December of that year I had a double mastectomy to create a masculine chest. A lot of my gender dysphoria is centered around the way that other people see me and not necessarily the way that I see myself. And so that social anxiety with strangers gendering me because of the way that my chest looked was something that really put me into a dark space. And I'm very open about this, and I'm a privileged person that can access the correct healthcare for myself. And I was able to pay for top surgery myself and finally find some relief. And that was a really amazing experience for me. And I also just want to really say and be honest that I probably would not be here today without access to that healthcare. And moving on from there, I thought, okay, I've got the body that I want, and I'm going to move on, and this is me living my best life. And that was when I started to get some dysphoria around my voice. And a couple of days ago, actually, was my 1 year anniversary on testosterone. So I've been on a low dose of testosterone for the past year, and that was something that really came into my journey at work and being an out non-binary person at work, because I am perceived to be a woman in most spaces because I'm obviously not a man. So there's only one or the other in a lot of people's minds. And that was something that was really hard for me to kind of push through and really get to the place where I could start speaking for myself and advocate for myself within the companies that I've been working with. And I think I was really lucky to work for a smaller company with around 30 people that was definitely more of a family environment, and that kind of prepared me for when I came to B6 Swap to be able to share with people that I really didn't know. And that was so important for me. I've been there for nearly 2 years, and it was only a few months ago that I sat down with the senior leadership team within New South Wales and, spent around 40 minutes telling them my journey and my mental struggles and why my pronouns are so important, what it means when you use she, her pronouns for me, and even gave them a full PowerPoint presentation around affirming words and words to really stay away from that make me feel uncomfortable. And being able to share my story with those people just made my life so much easier. As soon as I went out of that room, someone accidentally used she, her pronouns, and one of the other people in the room picked up on it straight away and just said them. And then the man was like, oh, yeah, them. And that was just so affirming for me to have them come out of that and be able to pick up on it straight away and realise. And I wish I'd done it sooner. I wish I had the confidence to sit those people down and say, hey, I really need this for my own mental health and my own comfortability at work. And maybe I could have saved myself around a year of, constantly wondering whether someone was a safe person to come out to, or can I speak up about my pronouns. And it's such a hard thing being non-binary and using they, them pronouns, because I know that the physical appearance of someone is usually what triggers someone's brain to use a she, her or a he, him. And to be able to speak up for myself, I found really, really hard. And it's something that I'm getting a lot better at thanks to opportunities like this in this space. And I hope that other people can take away from that and really do whatever they can to continue to educate themselves to make the space a lot better for people like me.
Yep. So, thank you for that, Taylor. And other than pronouns and sort of that opportunity to share your identity and help educate people, which can also be a burden on people within the community if it does, as Nat indicated, and Nikki as well. Are there other positive steps that you think that your employers have taken as you've been on this journey that maybe people in here should be taking on board and thinking about if they have someone who's non-binary within their teams?
Yeah, so I think celebrating days of significance within the company on a national level, if you're a national company, is a really great way to show your support for a whole diverse range of people. And I think I definitely look at it more favourably for companies that do show their support for people within this community. And it's just a really great way to educate your staff around why things are so important. And I think maybe bringing in people to share their stories. Storytelling is so powerful, and it can really reach people on a different level and get them to take away something and think, oh, I'm going to think about Taylor when I see another non-binary person, or I see pronouns in a signature. And for example, I recently started using pronouns in my signature, and I wish that we could do it company-wide because it makes me feel less alone. It does reduce my anxiety to use that, to have they them there in my email signature, but I wish that, you know, there was 20% of the people instead of 0.5% of the company using it, because I feel like it definitely outs myself. But it's one of the things that I have to do every single day. I have to out myself, otherwise my mental health will suffer. So yeah, if companies would like to kind of take that first step, celebrating days of significance and looking into using rainbows wherever you can to show that you're a safe space, and educating your employees so that when they go out into the world, they can take that mindset with them and be so much more open in public spaces, and generally things like, things like that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Taylor. And then Melissa, Taylor's just spoken, as did everyone, really about the power of personal stories, and yeah, you shared with me how privileged you felt hearing all of these participants' personal stories through the research project. Now, was there a lot of commonality between the stories, and were there some particular things that really stood out to you as part of that process?
Well, as you said, I did interview all of the participants, and I want to thank those of you who are here and those that are listening online. I know that there were some people who said they were going to participate, and this research wouldn't have been possible without you. There were 23 participants, and I really appreciate everyone giving up their time, sharing their stories with a stranger. And, you know, it's very daunting, but people were very open, and there was a real mix of experiences. Some were, you know, really traumatic and tragic, and some had really positive experiences, and some people had both. And, you know, there were times.
Is your microphone on?
Oh, quiet. Oh, you can't hear. Okay. Do I want to start again?
Yeah, no.
Okay. So there was one interviewee who we were both crying. You know, he was recounting his, you know, he's growing up. He was a man in his late 50s now. He only recently come out, and he'd experienced a lot of trauma going through, you know, university. He was born in South Africa, educated at Cambridge, and now he's in Australia. But he did say to me, and I asked him if it was okay to recount this, but he said he went to a conference just a few weeks ago, and it was one of the first times he'd taken his partner, and he said, so many of my colleagues didn't turn a hair, and I could take heart in another step forward in the process of learning to love myself. But then he also went on to say that in the recent International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia, it was really personally upsetting, because back when in 1990, when he was in his late 20s, he had a degree from Cambridge. He had attained his professional chartered status with the Institute of Engineers in London. Yet at that time, homosexuality was within the classification of diseases and related health problems. And so these sorts of things really can cause people trauma for a long time. And so it's important to think about what's happening in our environment now, and thinking about, you know, the impact that has down the track. And during the interviews, people did speak about the effects of same-sex marriage. Even though it was a great relief to have the result, there was a lot of pain and anxiety that went with that. And, you know, some people said that, you know, they carry that, as well as things like the religious discrimination bill, that people are concerned about that as well. But one of the things that it's a mixed finding, in that quite a few people delayed coming out at work for months, years, decades. And then, as with the participant I mentioned, that sometimes when they came out, people were really positive and gave them, you know, support. There was no negativity, and so they actually regretted not coming out those, you know, months, years or decades earlier. And so what that says is that we need to make sure that those people feel comfortable to come out at work. And so what are the things that leaders should be doing to be showing and setting that workplace culture to make sure that people know that this is a workplace that they can feel safe in? And so some of the things, public statements, making sure that people are very clear about what behaviours are acceptable at work, making sure, as Taylor said, having rainbows in places, and sometimes maybe people might not feel comfortable being really explicit, but some people said, even just if I see a little rainbow on a folder or a desk, it really makes me feel safe and that I can approach that person if I have a problem. And so again, in terms of leadership, making sure that the organisation has the policies in place that are explicitly pointing out that LGBT plus discrimination will not be tolerated. People said that they felt comfortable knowing that they could point to a policy and that they could, report something when it's explicitly written there, that made them feel confident. And in that sense, government agencies who had often much stronger and explicit policies were regarded as safer spaces, or bigger corporations, whereas smaller organisations or businesses who may not have had those policies, people were just less certain. But that doesn't mean that people didn't have a good experience in some small workplaces. So I know Taylor had a good experience with a small business, which is fantastic. Nikki mentioned before about trans people on site, and there is I think variation there, because we had a trans man participate in the research, and one of their positive experiences was when in the early stages of transitioning, they were on a work site with some other young men, and they actually had this banter, and it was positive about transitioning to being a man and what that meant, and that was a really positive experience and exchange that was really open and non-judgmental. And unfortunately though, that participant didn't always have such positive experiences, so we know there's a lot of variation. But whilst the participants felt they didn't want to be seen as, or LGBT plus inclusion be tokenistic or just paid lip service, certainly, and they want to just blend in and be like everyone else. But the way to get there was through more visibility, more talking about it, making expectations clear about standards at work, and making sure that the leaders make it clear that if someone has a problem, that they can go to them and that employee will be supported. And so that was what really gave people confidence, is policies, strong leadership, visibility, and that can help people come out much sooner in the organisation and be themselves. So they don't have to wait months, years, decades before they can come out and be themselves at work.
Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And Dale, I'll turn to you in a second. That one of the participants in the research that Melissa interviewed commented that while her boss didn't have a problem with her sexuality, she wasn't sure how he would handle a complaint if one came up. How do you think she should have expected a site manager to handle a complaint if one came up about her sexuality?
Yeah, I would certainly expect that a leader who may not necessarily feel totally comfortable and maybe equipped for a hard conversation, at least be supportive and realise that an organisation like ourselves, there's many other avenues where to gain support, knowledge, what other things the organisation do. So that to me is part of leadership. It's you don't necessarily have all the answers, but you're looking to be incredibly strong and supportive for that individual to make sure that they feel that they're getting all the support that they can get. So that's what I would. That to me is what I'd be looking for in a leadership group, especially on site, that might feel old and crusty and been around for a long period of time, and may even be sort of locked in maybe how they think the past construction sites would be run, but know what the expectation is of today and just know where to go. You know, it's like, I think you mentioned like a mates in construction. There's different avenues to bring support, understanding, capability, and the right people to a situation. So, you know, I'm always looking for people to be open in who to go to and get support.
Thank you, Dale. And then Nikki, I've got a question for you. That you've spoken about the construction industry, but you also have clients who are in other male-dominated sectors like mining. What do you think we could learn, or what have you seen in those sectors that can help reach through to that type of a workforce?
Yeah, I mean, personally, talking about sort of the diversity inclusion area, in some sectors, it's kind of considered fluffy, lives in HR, doesn't really live anywhere else. Whereas in these other types of sectors, it's very much about workplace health and safety. It's a very, very strong aspect of that, because it's about creating safe spaces, but it's also physical safety. We've got people working with heavy equipment. We've got people doing stuff that if they are not concentrating, if their mind is distracted because they're worried about self-editing, they're worried about perhaps being bullied, concentration lapses, that's when accidents happen. So you've got that physical safety stuff. You have obviously got the mental health and safety stuff, and we know that if people are worried about editing, if they're distracted, or if they are experiencing bullying, there's a mental impact on them. So positioning it that way so it gets included very, very thoroughly, as this is something that's very important to us. In terms of the delivery of that message, probably the least successful way of delivering it is an edict on high from head office. It's just like, yeah, right, you don't know. How it's been successful is storytelling has been incredibly successful. So we've all spoken about the power of storytelling, and I'll give some examples from a similar organisation, BHP, so mining, big holes in ground, digging stuff out of holes. They've done a load of training and to all of their mine sites, and how they do it is really really successful. And they have people from their network that go along and share their own lived experience, and so it becomes relevant to the people there. And it adds credibility. It's not just somebody flying in again from head office that doesn't know anything about it. It's people that are talking about it and makes it relevant to the people there. And there's a couple of I mean, there's one story which is absolutely famous in Pride and Diversity Land, and if you've been to any of our conferences, I'm sure you'll have heard it. There's one of the co-leads from the Jasper network at BHP has their story, and it's the legend of Darren and Taryn. And she's a gay woman, and she used to be based in Brisbane, and then her job changed and she had to go out and do engagement into all of these sites in regional Queensland. Wasn't sure how that was going to go. And she had this girlfriend called Taryn. She went out to this site. About 2 hours after she'd been there, she started getting asked the questions about her personal life and, have you got a boyfriend? Now, Kim did not have a boyfriend. Kim had a girlfriend, but changed the gender of the girlfriend, and the girlfriend became Darren, and they asked more questions, and this lie got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then eventually, as it was going to happen, one of her colleagues from Brisbane came and accidentally outed her. So it was just terrible. Kim felt really, really bad, didn't know what the response was going to be, but felt bad about lying. Everyone there felt really, really bad because she'd lied to them, but they also felt bad that she had to lie to them. We had another story of somebody who worked in a mine site and basically lived underground like a mole, and had been underground as a miner for 5 years, didn't come out until their network arrived, and then thought, it's a safe space for me now, I feel safe to come out. And suddenly all the colleagues that he'd been working with for the 5 years, they were all suddenly really freaked out. It's like, but we have showers with this bloke, and we can't have showers with him, what's going to happen? And it's like, but you've been having showers with him for the last 5 years, and what has happened? And they're like, oh yeah. So him talking about his experience and people's response, and again made it personal. And the other thing that they've done, which has been really successful, is when they are going to do an initiative and they're going to deliver training, is they have an ally from that site teed up who can share their story and why it's really important. So again, it's somebody that's there, somebody that they know. It's not necessarily an LGBTQ person, but it could be a site manager who talked about why this is an important initiative for them, why it's important for somebody that works on site. So making it personal, making it credible.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikki. Now, I'm conscious that we've been doing a lot of talking up here, but haven't had an opportunity for questions from the audience. So I'll read one out from here that's been submitted online, but if anyone in the room has any questions, please put your hand up and a microphone will be brought around to you, which are being wiped between people. Someone has said that they read the reports and noted that with 23 construction employees, but it was sort of a split of blue collar and white collar people. Melissa, did you get a sense that it was a very different experience from the blue collar people versus the white collar people, or was it a bit more nuanced than that?
I think it is fair to say there was a difference between the blue collar and white collar. There were people who had worked, who were much less certain about coming out, and their stories about coming out on site was more difficult. So, we had one young woman who was open on site, but was reluctant to call out bad behaviour by colleagues because of her precarious employment. And it was a regional New South Wales town, and she didn't want to get known as having been a troublemaker or something. And so that sort of example is that even though she was out, that there were still concerns about the limits on her ability to say that some behaviour is, not appropriate. One other example, we also had a fly-in, fly-out worker who didn't come out during that period of that type of work because he was concerned that because they work in small teams and small teams can, they really rely on each other so closely for safety that he was really worried about coming out in that environment, because if, on a job, all their response was to exclude him, that could be a safety issue, and that his experience out during those periods of work would be, could potentially be risky. But there was definitely, I think, among the corporate participants, much higher levels of acceptance, more diversity amongst the people in that workplace in general. So yeah, I think that's fair to say that there was differences, but there's still variation in terms of, the size of the business didn't always mean that people had a good experience. So yeah, I'm not sure if Nat wants to add something.
I just wanted to add two things. When you're on site and you're moving between teams, and that sort of came up where some people preferred to be, say, in a maintenance crew where, they didn't have to keep coming out every time they moved from site to site. And it's such a fluid industry that, you're moving around a lot, so you can't be guaranteed in working with the same people all the time. And the other thing is where you are on the power hierarchy ladder, so really hard for apprentices and junior people and people in precarious contract work, much easier to sort of come out and possibly, again, it's this catch-22 of doing the labour. If you're up senior, you can't be what you can't see, but it is really important for those people from the community to come out and be leaders in organisations and for leaders to promote them within their business. And so it, where you step in hierarchy also has an impact. So I think greater support around apprentices and more junior people is really needed.
Thank you. Is there any questions in the room? No. Okay, so one other one, and I'll. Okay.
Hi, Jason from Lendlease, he, him pronouns. We're sitting in a head office, which I refer to as the ivory tower. I used to work on site when I first started here. That was in the distance. So we've talked a lot, or the panelists have talked a lot about head office and sites, and we're predominantly talking about sites. I'm probably going to put someone else in the room on the spot. I remember I've worked with the Employee Resource Group here for 10 years, and James came to us about 8 years ago from site, and we were sitting in our ivory head office talking about what we're going to do. And James comes in, Sparky, well, I want to come out. How are you going to do that? So it's been 8 years So I'd probably like to get James's experience of how, based on what we talked about now, you're still living that life. How has it changed over the 8 years, and what more does our organisation need to do to support you and our site workers? Because we've got Dale on the line too.
For me, it was quite a positive experience. Like, as an electrician, I was an apprentice at the time, so it wasn't that complete power struggle. But after about 2, 4, maybe a bit longer weeks, just became normal, and everyone could, as you said, have the banter, and it become part of me, and I was out and free and calm and normal at work and just can be my true self. I've actually gone up leadership positions now within the company, so I'm at a sort of live manager sort of position now, and I have my rainbow laces that you've given me and have the ally on top of my hard hat and stuff like that. So, and everyone knows across, because I deal with a lot of contractors all around Sydney, like I must know close to 500 people, and they all know I'm gay, and it's fine and it's not an issue. So for me personally, it's been an amazing experience going from that to this, because if it wasn't for that initial interaction, I don't think I'll be where I am now, like as an out gay man. And I like to be present and visible for people on these sites, because I deal with a lot of small contractors as well. So there might be someone out there that needs someone like me. And I've had a few guys come up to me over the years and say, I might not be gay themselves, but say, I've got a friend, I've got a brother, I've got this, I've got that, and we can give them that advice. For other people, I think on site as well, it's actually having that visibility of knowing it's safe to be gay, especially as an apprentice, even more as well as a tradesman. I think there needs to be posters on the wall. There needs to be, as you said, in the inductions, there needs to be more than just one slide saying we won't accept like bad language or things about diversity. It needs to be a little bit more than that. Policies as well, but also people being able to find the policies is another issue. And then having either allies or out people in leadership positions, or not just ivory tower leadership positions, which most people are. It's like that line manager, area manager sort of position. You want those people in construction to know, oh, okay, this leadership's he's gay or whatever. I can go up to them, have a conversation. I think it's about that.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Look, I mean, in the interest of time, because we haven't got a lot, unfortunately, there's lots more questions we'd like to go through. But if I can ask each of the panel, what would be one key action that you'd like people to take away from this discussion and maybe take back into their workplaces and implement? So Dale, I might start with you.
Yeah, look, a call out to leadership, and I think everybody's a leader, and we've had a lot of this conversation about sort of what people look to and look for in leaders, to being inclusive, supportive, knowledgeable, visible, and my shout out to all the people who consider themselves leaders and role models is to step up and very much demonstrate an open and inclusive environment, and be that role model that an apprentice is looking for in the industry. So calling all leaders.
Thank you, Dale. Nat?
Mine's really big and aspirational, but to bake into each of the project life cycle stages, a bit of a LGBT plus lens, in across those stages, so that we actually bake it into the way we build, rather than trying to do things at the end and leave it to the poor contractor to roll it out. So, to really have those stage gates and think about it as we design our projects.
I think for those organisations that have got to a place where the data indicates that many organisations are, start looking a bit more of the complexities within the LGBTQ population, and start looking at specific requirements for those more marginalised within the LGBTQ population, and work out how we do things differently, specifically for those people.
Thank you. Melissa, what would you say?
I might be preaching to the converted here, but just I think more broadly, if people in the workplace could take on putting that rainbow sticker somewhere, it was really powerful to some participants who were not out at work, and that for them it was just a small, simple gesture that made them feel comfortable, that they knew that they had someone that they could go to for support.
Taylor?
I would say every person out there that considers themselves an ally, get involved in your workplace activities around diversity and inclusion. And if they're not happening, you know, ask your leaders why and ask them if you can help organise things and really push for it, because honestly, you're going to save someone's life by making the environment a place where they can be themselves and bring their full self to work. And you might not think that it's a big deal, but it will change someone's life just having you do something so small.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I'm going to give a few of my own that I want people to take out. But one is follow Interbuild on LinkedIn and go to the website, because that's really where we want to try and keep the conversation happening. And this is one event, but we actually need to make sure that this isn't one event and that the industry is actually collaborating, because as Dale indicated and as Nat did, the subcontract nature of our workforce and the way that teams are so sort of toing and froing all the time, unless we get everybody on board, we're not going to be able to affect sustainable change. And Dale spoke about that sustainability piece. Don't Google us, because Google's not being friendly at the moment, but I'm sending out an email after this event that has the necessary links. Plan to have conversations around workplace inclusion for Wear It Purple. That's coming up on 27th of August, so you've got a couple of months now to get yourself sorted out. I've got my jacket ready to go. And it is really a good opportunity to target a conversation, but as people have said, we don't want it to just be one day a year. And the theme this year is start a conversation, keep it going. And that's really a theme that we want to take, I think, from this panel discussion is should be a start of a conversation. Interbuild will be producing a whole bunch of resources to help support those conversations. So it doesn't mean you've got to try and figure out if you're in an organisation that doesn't even have a D&I function or doesn't have a HR people. We will still have resources that can help you to guide people through a conversation. And read the report. I mean, it's a great piece of research that Nat and Melissa have done, and there is a lot of great kernels of truth in there. And the important thing of that report is it has a lot of the human stories, and that it's when it becomes real that's actually when you realise why we're doing this, because as Taylor said, you will be saving lives, and that's what we all want to do. And please fill out the survey that I include in the email that's gone out. Look, I'd like to thank everybody who's participated in the panel today, and also who's come along and joined in the conversation. It's great to see so many people interested in this topic. I'd particularly like to thank Taylor for sharing their personal story. Like, it's never easy to get up on stage and talk about something that is so close to your identity and not know how people are necessarily going to react, even if you think it's probably a safe space. You just never know for sure. So yeah, I mean, you are such an awesome advocate for this sort of stuff, and I'm sure your colleagues at Bessex Watpac are very grateful to have you on the team. So that's all great. So look, thank you all very much, and I look forward to seeing you at other events or conversing with you on this topic in other forums. So thank you and goodbye. Thank you.